May I introduce our today's next speaker, uh, Dr. Datta Sawant sir. He is an associate professor of English from Toshniwal Arts, Commerce and Science College, Sengav, and on online platform. He is very much familiar to all the teachers and the students. He has prepared YouTube videos from first year to third year for all papers and all the texts. So he is a well-known personality for our students. So we are really honored to have you, Dr. Datta Sawant sir, here. And Dr. Datta Sawant sir will speak on a short story to build a fire. Now, this is from American Literature paper to build a fire by London. I request Professor Dr. Datta Sawant sir to speak on the short story to build a fire by London. Professor Dr. Datta Sawant sir,
Yeah,
please.
yeah, sir. Thank you very much, sir. For giving me the opportunity. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. So, Department of English, KSP Mandal Shivaji Mahavidyalay Udgir, and Department of English, Maharashtra Udaygiri Mahavidyalay Udgir, jointly organized this university level online invited lecture series for undergraduate students of English of compulsory optional and SEC. Respected Dr. Vinayak Zadav sir, Principal, Dr. R. R. Tambodi, Dr. Navle sir, Dr. Nagori madam, and the whole organizing committee, Dr. K. W. Gutte sir, Mr. P. D. Mane sir, Mr. Mudvidge sir, uh, Mr. S. M. Suryavanshi sir, Dr. Gawane sir, Mr. Munde sir, and Amba Sange sir. It's actually an honor for me to be part of this series, lecture series. And dear students, today we are going to talk about a very renowned short story in American literature, that is To Build a Fire by Jack London. Let me tell you the scheme of this lecture. First, we will talk about this story To Build a Fire. I also provide you in this course of time how you are going to analyze any short story, or what are the basic parameters of analyzing the short story. For that matter, you can also use these parameters or points to analyze a novel and up to some extent a drama. Then we will talk about who was Jack London in brief, because we don't have much time, so I will uh, try to be very brief in all these things and close my session by the time. Then we will talk about the story, that is To Build a Fire. Then we will analyze the story with the parameters which we will initially talking in this series, and then we will conclude the story To Build a Fire. So dear students, let's start with Jack London. I will share my screen so that it would be better to understand a short story. So please
Yeah,
enable
yeah,
my
yeah.
screen. Okay.
I am allowing that privilege to you.
Okay, sir.
Yes, now you are able to share your screen.
So here, dear students, you are looking at the picture of Jack London, and we have a story called To Build a Fire by Jack London. So as I discussed that we will start with what is story. It's in a brief. So I try to give you the definition of story. The story is a work of prose fiction, minimal to novel, short in length, includes a few characters with single setting, which is built to read in single setting. Now, if you look at this short definition, you will understand it is a work of prose fiction. So there is difference between verse style and the prose. You understand prose and verse. Then again, next it is said that it is minimal to novel. So novel is a larger canvas of writing, whereas short story is short in length and it has a few characters compared with novel. It is also important to know that it has set in single sitting, or you will find there is a single place where the short story happens, as one act play most of the times happens in a single sitting, and it is meant to read in single sitting. Just look at the words, sitting and sitting are different. Sitting means once you can read this short story, means it is a brief. Based on this definition, we can understand various features of short story, and also these are the parameters to understand a short story. Here you can find there are 9 points. These 9 points will help you to understand any short story, any novel, or any drama for that matter. Here very first, you need to understand the length of short story. Short story is generally composed between 2000 to 6000 words. It is considered the ideal length of a short story, but we also find there are short stories with more length, 8000 and 10,000 words too, but ideal length is considered 2000 to 6000 words. Next point of parameter you can say is plot. So plot is nothing but a chain of events, how events happen in a story, how events happen in a novel or short story or drama too. You have to understand from where the event started, what is the first event, second event, or is there any relation of first event to second, or the flow of events, what is that flow of events is understood in plot. Next we have characters. In story you find 2 to 6 characters because it is a short story. So short in length, short in characters too. So there are 2 to 6 characters. Then dialogues are important part of any literary work except poetry. You find dialogues give reality to the writing, hence we find dialogues in the story. In this story, to build a fire, we also have dialogues. And next point or parameter is setting and atmosphere. Here we need to think about setting, means where does these events happen, what is the place, and what kind of atmosphere is there in the story. Next point, dear students, is narrative technique. Basically there are 3 narrative techniques, and in this story we find that third person narration is used. There is first person narration, second person narration, and third person narration. Third person narrative technique is used often in short stories and novels. In a way we also find first person narrative technique, that is a person from the same story or same novel narrates you the story or tells you the story, and in third person someone outside of the story tells you the story or narrates the events happened in the story. Next point is theme. So theme is nothing but an idea which is running throughout the story, a prominent idea running throughout the story. There are different themes in different novels or short stories. In to build a story, we will analyze this theme too. And last 2 points also are important regarding short story, that is opening. How does short story begins, or how does this short story ends, or what is the closing of short story. Now I hope you got these points. These points are important to analyze a short story, and based on these points you can analyze short story. You need not to consider other material if you have these points with you and you will analyze any short story for that matter. I am not talking about to build a fire only here, but it is in general. You can analyze any short story based on these points. So remember these points, try to understand these points. Now next we will start Jack London's To Build a Fire. Before that, I would like to share some light on who was Jack London. because it is important. Jack London was one of the celebrated American writers. He was born in 1876 and died in 1916 in California. So this time span also is important. If you look at this time span, 1876 to 1916, it is only a 40 years time span. It means that he received a very little time to write, and if you look at his writing career, you will find that only in 16 years of his writing career he composed more than 50 books. And for your curiosity, he earned a large amount of wealth only through writing. He earned 14 acres of property in Glen Allen, California, where he wanted to build a ranch. A ranch is nothing but a large farm property. And he earned this beauty ranch only through writing. So this can be inspirational for you. You also can write short stories or novels in future. You can choose your career option as writing, because this may motivate you or this can motivate you. He earned a lot of wealth through writing. Dear students, he contributed to science fiction. His science fiction is very popular, and we have here his popular novel called The Scarlet Plague, which is very famous. And it is said that in this COVID pandemic, there are many quotations used from the Scarlet Letters. If you look at this time, in the words of Charles Dickens, it is the best of the times and the worst of the times. Best in the sense that you can use this time for creative purpose or creativity. It is worst, as we all know that this pandemic has made us very live in a bad situation, or which has stuck all our movements. Dear students, we will start Jack London's To Build a Fire with a famous quotation of Jack London, so that we can get some inspiration or motivation from Jack London. So he says, the proper function of man is to live, not to exist. Please pay attention to these words. I shall not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. It is important to use our time. Whatever time we have, we must use it creatively. Now, dear students, let's start with Jack London's To Build a Fire, a story published in 1908, and I think it is composed before that, but published in 1908. Now, it is important to know the backdrop or background of this story, or what is there in the story. So, there is a phenomena happened in America in 1890s, which is called gold rush. There were many Americans who set their expeditions, set their travels to find the gold in Yukon territory in Canada. There is a territory called Yukon, and in this territory our story To Build a Fire happens. So to find out gold, many Americans went on these expeditions. They travels in a very disastrous atmosphere in a cold region called Yukon. Here you can see this region Yukon on the map of United States. Here this is the Yukon territory in Canada, and there happened this event, gold rush. Actually there is no mention of this words gold rush in the story, but the backdrop or the background of the story clearly states that it is in this region of Yukon after this gold rush, because we have references of Jack London, who also said this expedition to find gold and become rich in a little time, and hence he had genuine experience of visiting this Yukon territory, which is the setting of our story To Build a Fire. There is another reference of a place in this story, that is Chilkoot Pass. As you can see, this is the snowy mountain, and this region is called Chilkoot Pass, from where the person goes and he sets his journey to find out a camp in this Yukon territory. So this is the setting, we can say, of our story, because setting is important. We should know about where does these events happens. There is another reference of a village or a town. Now it has become a very beautiful city, Dawson town. You can see this is Yukon river. This is a snowfall region, Yukon river, and this is the Dawson city. And there is a reference in the story that it is 70 miles, means this Yukon territory or the camp where the other boys stayed, 70 miles from this Dawson city. So these three places are important in the story. Now dear students, there are only two characters in the story. As I already talked that in a story character may be from 2 to 6, and hence in this story we have only two characters. There is a man who does not have a name, just it is referred as man, and other we have his dog. You can see in the picture, and you also can observe the what kind of atmosphere might be there. This is a snowy region, this is cold, extreme cold region where you need many means for survival, and fire is one of the significant means of survival in this region. We can understand through this picture. Now dear students, let me tell you the story properly. What happens in the story? It is very clear that a man sets his journey from one point to reach another point, and what happens in these 2 points is this story to build a fire. Now the weather conditions of this region is extreme cold. There is an old timer called Sulphur Creek, and he warns this man not to go in that region because the conditions are extreme cold and it is very difficult to survive or even exist in this kind of situation. But still the man sets his journey, sets his expedition to reach to another point, that is the camp, which is given in the story. He starts his journey right in the morning at 9 o'clock or before that 9 o'clock, and in the afternoon he travels a long distance, but he was a Chechaco. Now this word comes in the story, Chechaco. Chechaco means a newcomer. It is a native word used in Yukon territory, means newcomer. So he was a newcomer in this territory and it was his first winter in such bad weather conditions. In the afternoon he suffers a lot from the extreme cold and he needs fire. In first attempt he sets fire and he becomes successful in setting the fire there in this territory, and he thinks that how he is fortunate that he is going to have the gold after some time. But after some time when he again starts his journey, he finds that the weather, the frost bites are unbearable and the weather is going extremely cold. There is reference that the weather measured there is 50 degree below zero, means it's a complete minus kind of weather and temperature recorded there. And now he feels that he, although he said the journey, the difficulties are there and he has to face many difficulties. Again he finds that again he needs to burn a fire, light a fire, and he starts lighting the fire. In the course of that his hands gets numb, they gets numb and it is very difficult him to light the fire. But in those difficulty he again second time becomes successful for setting the fire and he burns the fire. But unfortunately a heap of snow falls on his fire from the tree, spruce tree there, and the fire gets stopped, and again he feels exhausted and he needs warmth. His dog with him, actually the instinct of dog was that he did not want to travel further, but the intellect of man forced the dog to travel further, and at the end he suffers extremely from the cold and succumbs to death. It is the ending of the story. Here the story ends. A man sets his journey from one point to reach the another point, and between he suffers, he struggles with nature, because here we find different types of themes occur in this story, which we are going to discuss here. And at the end the man dies. We can say that it is a sad story. The ending of the story is sad, and here Jack London depicted the struggle of man against the nature. All the time we find that these kind of struggles happen, and most of the times nature uh, overcomes the human being. The same thing is disclosed in this story. Now dear students, we'll analyze this story based on these parameters or based on these points. The very first point we discussed is length. If you measure the length of this short story, you will find there are approximately 7104 words. Means it is not too short story, it is a longer short story. You have 7000 words in this short story. It means you have minute description of all the things happened in the short story. For example, here we have description of the wild atmosphere, we have description of snow, we have description of the place, we have description of the trees and jungle in the short story. So these 7000 words contribute to the enhancement of the story. This is the length of the short story. It is not too short but a longer short story of 7000 words. The second point is plot. What is the plot of this short story? The plot is very simple. It is a journey from morning to evening. The man sets his journey or expedition from a point to reach to a second point. But in the course of this journey, there happens many things. He suffers from the cold, extreme cold atmosphere. He repents on his decision and he forces dog to travel further. These kind of things happen in the plot one by one. Next point, only there are two characters. We have a man and a dog. These two characters are representative of human beings. How? Because the man here represents the intellectual side of human beings and the dog the very instinct. And here we find that instinct is more important than intellect in some cases in this story. So only these two characters we have, man and dog. There are other characters. For example, there is an old timer, but we do not have more description of this old timer. There is only one reference. Then we have some boys at the part of that camp, at the side of that camp, but it also do not have more development of these characters, the old timer and the other boys. Only two major characters we have, and this man is the protagonist of the story, the main character of the story. Next we have dialogues. Actually there are not many dialogues in the short story, but whatever happens it is told by a third person. This story is narrated by third person. What is going in the mind of that person also is told by the third person, and hence we find there are a few dialogues, and among them we have one of, and this is the last words of this man on the deathbed. You were right, old horse, you were right, the man mumbled to old timer of Sulphur Creek. Now this old horse is referred to this old timer. He repents his decision why he started this journey, and these are the last words of the man. But these last words give liveliness to the story, and it reaches us to the mind of that old person or that man who set this travel or journey. Next students, we have setting and atmosphere. As I already uh, shown you, you have Yukon territory. It's a wild snow covered land, as you see in the picture. This kind of land, is represented in the story Yukon territory, and all events happen in this Yukon territory on the snow land. Next we have narrative technique. Here the author uses third person narration or omniscient narrative technique to tell the story. He uses pronoun like he and the nouns like man and dog, and hence everything is told by this third person or the writer or narrator. Now next is an important part of any literary work, or here in this case short story, we have themes. Here are many themes. Just I will give you points of all these themes. Here we have prominent themes. If you read the story, you will find many themes rather than these themes too. So here first we have relationship between man, nature and animal. Then second we have knowledge, lack of experience and use of it. So second theme is important because humans are the kind of animals on this earth planet who has knowledge, but most of the times we lack in experience. Actually this weather condition is known to the man in this short story, but he lacks experience and how to use that knowledge and experience, and then he becomes the victim of the old cold weather or extreme condition of nature. Next theme we have instinct and intellect. Man represent intellect and the dog represents instinct. Next theme we have death. If you look at this atmosphere, if you look at the words used to describe this atmosphere, you will find that there is an existence of death throughout this short story. The very beginning, when you read this short story, you will notice that there might be happen something very severe in the story based on the description you find in the story. Next we have helplessness. So man becomes helpless in this condition and he could not survive in the cold weather condition. Next we have wilderness, wilderness of the atmosphere, wilderness of the region, wilderness of the jungle. Next theme we have struggle to survive or struggle to exist. The man's struggle is shown in the story. You read this story and you will understand these points very easily. Dear students, next we have opening of the story. Many things are covered in the opening of the story, short story, because short story is relatively less in length and hence writer has to imbibe everything in the story, and hence he has to use the words very carefully in any short story. Here we have the opening line of the short story. The short story begins with this line, I quote, "Day had broken cold and grey, exceedingly cold and grey, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon trail and climbed the high earth bank where," and in this way the story goes on. You see here this word day had broken cold and grey, and again the same words are used, cold and grey. This intensifies the atmosphere in the story. This intensifies the conditions, weather conditions in the story. Exceedingly cold, you see how author has narrated or how author has used this kind of diction in the story to enhance the or focus the atmosphere, the weather condition. This is the opening. In the opening or first paragraph you will get the characters and the main plot of the story or the main crux of the story in the very first paragraph. Here when the man is a character we have here, and you also have setting Yukon trail, climbed the high earth bank. So this is the importance of the opening paragraph or opening lines of the short story. So this is the opening of to build a fire. And the last point here we have closing or ending. How does story ends? If you read Arcana and short stories, you will find there is a very different kind of ending provided by Arcana. In the same way, any author or a short story writer provides you some different kind of ending or closing. This is the last paragraph of the story to build a fire, and I quote here, "Then the man dozed off into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known." Now look at this first line of the last paragraph. The man dozed off into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep. Means he is gradually dying. He is dying there, and This is expressed in this last paragraph of the first line. Then you have last line here I recorded. Then it turned and trotted up the trail in the direction of the camp it knew, where the other food providers and fire providers. Now this it is used for the dog. Dog survives the weather conditions because he has hairs on his skin and he has a very tough skin to face such kind of weather or tough weather. So the dog turned and trotted up the trail. Dog leaves that man who is dying there. This is the ending of the short story. You can understand when you read this short story completely. Now dear students, I hope you got the overall idea of this short story. If still you have any doubt, any query, any kind of concern regarding short story, you can go to my YouTube channel Literature Simply. I have just given you here. Then I also have a Telegram channel called Literature Simply with the same name, where I post notes and other study material. You can also join there, and there is a website called literaturesimply.com where you can find many articles I posted. And if you want to ask me questions based on this short story, or if you need any material or own notes, you can directly contact me on this email, contactliteraturesimply@gmail.com. So dear students, thank you very much for listening to me very carefully. I hope we will meet in such kind of sessions next. Navle sir, thank you very much.